Egyptians were black. No, they were not. I don't know what's the obsession with our skin color, but we were not black. There are Nubian Egyptians, they look like that, but that's a very slim group. Egyptians come in all skin.
Hello my viewers and welcome to Exploration of Identity and Heritage in the context of ancient Egypt and modern perceptions. Now today we'll take a look into a thought-provoking discussion sparked by various perspectives on what it means to be Egyptian and how identities are shaped by historical and geopolitical forces. From debates on whether Egyptians were black to the contentious use of the term Middle Eastern and its colonial origins, we will unravel how these labels influence our understanding of identity. We'll also tackle the claims linking contemporary African American and Caribbean identities to ancient Egyptian culture. So join me as we navigate these complex conversations, seeking to understand the intersections of history, identity, and cultural heritage. With that said, let's take a look at these interesting videos. I will be right back, and when I do, I share more on this.
Y'all, so my trip to Egypt was so slimy, I had to leave before I beat somebody up. Traveling through there, I just had this weird feeling like the people that were living there didn't actually belong there. I don't know. And I'm talking about specifically Cairo and Giza, but really Cairo. But you know what? They would always tell me, you look Egyptian. And I'll be looking around like, I don't look like none of y'all folks. Damn, I ate that pig up. It was like a if you know, you know thing. Because every 10 minutes I was getting the slogan, Egypt, the land of the blacks. You belong here, yada, yada, yada. But I was just like, man, y'all just want to sell something. Which I get. Until I learned that the real Egyptians were actually pushed out of Egypt down south. And now are considered Nubians. Not to say the Nubians weren't already there, but I'm saying like, bro, like Aswan, Egypt, that's where I should have been. I must add, there was slavery activity happening while I was there, and I just was in disbelief. I finally found an old head, and he chopping it up with me, and he's like, bro, go to Aswan next time, spend some time there. So I get to wondering, like, okay, what Aswan talking about? Guys, this is a man from Aswan, and this was taken about 100 years ago. This was me, that him. I'm like, damn, he do look like my cousin. Point of this video is not the hint that I'm Egyptian or that y'all Egyptian. What I'm saying is I just don't think the story of Egypt that everybody was sold is the exact truth. And if you look into the Aswan Nubian people, they're decreasing by the day. It's like that story may not ever be told.
All right, today we're talking about an ancient African king from the 25th dynasty. This is King Taharka from the Kush kingdom. He was crowned king around 690 BC. He was king of Egypt and Nubia. Now, during the late period in Egypt, Egypt was subjected to a lot of invasions. Taharka is one of several kings from the south that had to reestablish order in Egypt. Taharka was able to see that these invasions coming in from the north was eroding all of the culture in Egypt, and it was making its way down to Nubia. This is something that he could not sit with. He went to war with the Assyrians and was able to keep them back. Even though they went to war for a couple of years, they never really got a chance to take over Upper and Lower Egypt. This is one of the kings from the south that never forgot where it came from. He had to go back home to show everybody exactly what the deal was. Again, Taharka, 25th Egyptian dynasty. So when you're talking about black pharaohs, black Egyptians, black Kushites, we're looking at it right here.
My college mentor urged African Americans not to claim ancient Egypt, but Caribbean and African Americans descend from West African tribes like the Yoruba and Igbo who come from ancient Egypt. Therefore, they can and should claim ancient Egyptian culture and land. Let me tell you about ancient Egyptian history so simple that a 5-year-old can understand. This is an ancient Egyptian man. This is a Yoruba, an Ibu, a Fulani, an Ewe, a Bantu. You see him? He looks black African. You can even DNA test this and show that they show quote-unquote sub-Saharan DNA. Clear? Okay. What happened to these black African ancient Egyptians? Ancient Egypt was invaded by many different Asiatic and European people. One of the invaders are the so-called Hyksos. Look at the Hyksos, how they look like. The Hyksos look like the so-called white Arabs. How do the people in North Africa look like today? Like the Hyksos. What happened to the Kemetic people? They migrated to other parts of North Africa, the black Berber nomad. They migrated south, the so-called Bantu people. They migrated southwest, the Yoruba, the Igbo people. This is this. This is this. This is also this. What about these people? These people are the ones who live in North Africa today.
That makes me cringe so badly as an Egyptian is when I hear another Egyptian person refer to themselves as Middle Eastern and really claim this Middle Eastern identity. I grew up in a neighborhood that's predominantly North African, Moroccan, Algerian, Egyptian, and there was always an elder in that neighborhood who would always get so angry when someone would go to his restaurant and say that his food or label his food as Middle Eastern and not Egyptian, and he would always go on this off the wall, off the rails rant, and I think it's kind of stuck in my brain. It's stuck in my brain, this rant, and now I cringe every time someone says an Egyptian is Middle Eastern. What he would always talk about is the fact that Middle Eastern, and this is true, Middle Eastern is a term that has been coined by the British. It was coined by the British in 1805. That term's use was then expanded specifically by the US government in its geopolitical affairs and engagement and intervention in that region specifically. And the way in which they labeled Middle East was from Egypt, Sudan, Libya, all the way to even sometimes Pakistan and Afghanistan. So it was just this swath of land that they saw for their own geopolitical interests. Many parts of this land didn't have any cultural, even linguistic signifiers that tied it together. It was really just let me just label this group of people that we want to categorize together because they seem connected in some way. I think as an Egyptian, we actually do have alternatives. We don't have to use that terminology. I know a lot of people within Southwest Asia have began to use Southwest Asian instead of Middle Eastern to categorize themselves. And I think for Egyptians, you could literally just straight up say Egyptian. I'm all about being as specific as possible when you are talking about people's identities because there are histories there. Egypt has a long, long history. North Africa has a long, long history that is outside of a Western gaze, that is outside a Eurocentric gaze. And I personally reject Eurocentric labeling of my identity.
I'll try to explain more about the video because I think a lot of you didn't really get my point. When I was a kid, as an Egyptian kid, I never knew the terms black and white, and I never heard any of my family members describing someone as black and white. But I know for a fact that people in the north of Egypt, they are of a light color skin, and as you go down to the south, or as we call it, Upper Egypt, they get more of a darker skin or tan skin. And regions there in Egypt are very diverse. Each region has its own culture, its own traditions, and so on. So speaking of Nubians, they never identify themselves as blacks. They are Nubians. If you ever met a Nubian person here in Egypt, he's just going to identify himself as Nubian. They're going to start speaking about their amazing culture and traditions, which is different than other regions in Egypt. And that was the whole point of my video. Egyptians never identified themselves as blacks, and they never identified the Egyptian history as black. And it's not white, it's simply Egyptian. And even the dark-skinned people here in Egypt are of completely different features and culture than the people who are claiming to be the real Egyptians, just because they are black. So again, call me racist, call me whatever. I'm defending my country, I'm defending my people, I'm defending my history. And anyone who's gonna claim something or fake my history is the real racist.
Now, the question of the race of ancient Egyptians was raised historically as a product of the early racial concepts of the 18th and 19th centuries and was linked to models of racial hierarchy primarily based on craniometry and anthropometry. A variety of views circulated about the racial identity of the Egyptians and the source of their culture. Now, some scholars argued that ancient Egyptian culture was influenced by other Afro-Asiatic speaking populations in North Africa, the Horn of Africa, or the Middle East, while others pointed to influences from various Nubian groups or populations in Europe. Now, in more recent times, some writers continue to challenge the mainstream view, some focusing on questioning the race of specific notable individuals such as the king represented in the Great Sphinx of Giza, native Egyptian pharaoh, and many more. Mainstream scholars reject the notion that Egypt was a palm color or black civilization. They maintain that applying modern notions of black or palm color races to ancient Egypt is anachronistic. In addition, scholars reject the notion implicit in the notion of black or palm color Egypt hypothesis that ancient Egypt was racially homogeneous. Instead, skin color varied between the peoples of Lower Egypt, Upper Egypt, and Nubia, who in various eras rose to power in ancient Egypt. Within Egyptian history, despite multiple foreign invasions, the demographics were not shifted substantially by large migrations. Now, in recent discussions about Egyptian identity, several key points emerged that challenge commonly held views and highlight the complexities of historical and modern identity labels. Firstly, the debate over the racial identity of ancient Egyptians often centers on the question of whether they were black. According to research, it's essential to acknowledge that ancient Egypt was a diverse and cosmopolitan society, influenced by various ethnic groups over millennia. The idea of race as understood today does not directly map onto ancient identities, which were more fluid and based on cultural and geographical affiliations rather than contemporary racial categories. Secondly, the term Middle Eastern is relatively recent and carries colonial and geopolitical connotations. Coined by the British in the 1850s and expanded by the US government, it was used to describe a strategic region encompassing areas from Egypt to parts of South Asia. Now, critics argue that this term imposes a Western-centric framework on diverse cultures with long histories that predate this geopolitical construct. Egypt, with its rich and ancient history, is often seen as distinct from the broader Middle Eastern label, which some Egyptians reject as a simplification of their unique heritage. Now, the discussion extends to claims about cultural connections between contemporary African Americans, Caribbean people, and ancient Egyptians. Some argue that African Americans and Caribbean individuals, particularly those with ancestral ties to West African tribes like the Yoruba and Igbo, have a historical link to ancient Egypt. Now, this claim is based on the notion that cultural and historical connections can transcend geographical boundaries and historical epochs. While these claims are debated, they reflect a broader search for historical roots and cultural continuity. Now, the human catastrophe of early modern slavery juxtaposed West and Central Africans with Northwest Europeans in the Americas. Out of this genocidal experience, race has become a dominant category for uniting and dividing people in modernity. Within the race debate, ancient Egypt has become a terrain contested by three mutually exclusive views. Firstly, that modern Egyptian, the ancient Egyptians are the same group of people as the modern Egyptians. Afrocentric, the ancient Egyptians were black Africans displaced by later movements of peoples, for example, the Macedonian, Roman, and Arab conquest. Eurocentric, the ancient Egyptians are ancestral to modern Europe. Now, the question of race can be approached from another vantage point. How did the ancient Egyptians group human beings? For this question, there are more diverse published sources, including pictorial and written. Now, for pictorial sources, differences in depicting peoples include differences in skin color, facial features, hair, costume, material, culture, tools, weapons, other artificial products. Substantive differences can only be verified from observation of the original or from good photographic reproductions. An Egyptological publication may assert clear differences in skin color and facial features, where the original depiction is not clear or reveals no difference. Now, the various types of difference may be borne out the archaeological record. Now, the race of the ancient Egyptians has long been a controversial subject of debate. Researchers use genetic information derived from mummies to shed light on the ancestry of the ancient Egyptians. Now, the results suggest that the ancient Egyptians were most closely related to the people of the Near East, particularly from the Levant. Egyptologists, writers, scholars, and others have argued the race of the ancient Egyptians since at least the 1970s. Now, some today believe they were sub-Saharan Africans. Now, as we've seen in these videos, the question of Egyptian identity is complex and multifaceted, with different perspectives and explanations, and that's what makes this topic so fascinating. But here's the thing, I don't have all the answers, and neither do the individuals featured in this video. That's why I want to invite you, my viewers, to share your own knowledge and insights on this topic. Let's create a space for learning and growth where we can educate each other and gain a deeper understanding of this rich and complex subject. Whether you are an expert in ancient history, a student of cultural studies, or simply someone with a passion for learning, I want to hear from you. Share your thoughts, share your research, share your personal experience, and let's have a conversation that enriches our understanding of Egyptian identity and its many nuances. We have finally come to the end of the video. Thank you for always watching, and see you in my next video as I bring you another interesting video.